Hildy is a bawdy, chain-smoking, 70-something former journalist who lives on the Upper West Side in an apartment that has a portal back to 1973. Time travel has rules, though, and Hildy breaks them by traveling back with healthcare aide Trista. Now both women will have to come to terms with their pasts before they lose their chance at having a future. From Ahoy Comics comes Alisa Whitney's Guilt. That's Gilt, a comic book that's Sex and the City meets the Golden Girls by way of the Twilight Zone. Call your local comic book store and ask them to order your copy of Guilt today.
Welcome to Endless, a Sandman podcast from Chipperish Media. I'm Brighter, erstwhile DC Comics editor, and secret bride of the faceless slaves of the Forbidden House, Alisa Whitney.
And I'm story expert in love with a sentence, Lani Diane Rich. Today on Endless, we're going to be talking about Into the Night and Lost Hearts, issues 15 and 16 from the Sandman comic book series.
Into the Night and Lost Hearts were written by Neil Gaiman and illustrated by Mike Dringenberg and Malcolm Jones III. Xylenol did the colors, Todd Klein lettered. Into the Night was edited by Karen Berger, assisted by Art Young. And Lost Hearts was edited by Karen Berger with Tom Pyre assisting. Covers by Dave McKean.
Human beings are the creatures of desire. They twist and bend as I require it. Time to wake up. In Into the Night, Rose comes home from the hospital, exhausted, and each of her roommates, except Gilbert, give her what they feel are comforting words. She has a cup of tea, wishes her mom could be there, and goes up to bed where she tosses and turns. While Ken dreams of money and monsters, Barbie dreams of being in a magical world with a mystical creature named Martin Tenbones, living out a fantasy narrative in which she is the heroine. Chantal, one of the two spider women, is having a dream about having a relationship with a sentence that spent most of last year in Czechoslovakia, which then mixes with Zelda's dream of her mother's disapproval. Zelda dreams of herself as Alice in Wonderland, rejected by her parents and doomed to wander alone until Chantal finds her and becomes her new mother, who might also be her old mother. Hal dreams of Bette Midler, Judy Garland, and Marilyn Monroe. They're about to tell him their secret when he wakes up for a moment, then drops back to sleep, where Judy as Dorothy tears off her face and becomes the Wicked Witch. Then she tears off that face and asks Hal for help, as her hands are now full. And Rose tries to go to sleep as she mentally doom scrolls through the concerns of her life. Her mother telling her about Unity's stroke, the doctor saying it's amazing her brother is still alive. She tries to forget, but wonders briefly where Gilbert went as she finally falls asleep. Gilbert is at the hospital, sitting with Jed. In the dreaming, Morpheus talks to Matthew the Raven about the dream vortex, which is also Rose Walker. The vortex is growing. Matthew asks what that means, but Dream sends him to the hospital to bring someone to him, while he deals with the vortex that is threatening the dreaming. Ken dreams of sex. Barbie's adventures in the Porpentine with Martin Tenbones continues, where they are in danger from something called the cuckoo, but Ken's dream starts to invade her dream space. Chantal dreams of a constantly restarting story that never completes, and that story shifts into Zelda's dream space. Hal dreams of an old boyfriend, and Rose dreams and knows she's dreaming and extends her consciousness into all the other dreams happening in the house, all of them seeking a place to belong. She nudges the walls between the various dream spaces and they come down. Ken appears as a monster in Barbie's magical world. Chantal and Zelda hold on to each other, terrified, and see Rose. Hal calls out to Barbie and Ken, wondering who's dreaming. Rose watches it all, while Morpheus watches Rose. Rose's awareness of everyone dreaming spreads through the city, and she breaks down more walls as dreams integrate, changing the dreamers forever. Morpheus says enough and pulls Rose out. In the house, everyone wakes up to varying levels of dread. Hal goes to look for Rose, but she's not in her room. In England, Unity wakes up for a moment and tells Miranda that her doll's house should go to Rose, then falls back asleep. Morpheus pulls Rose into the greater dreaming, where they can watch the tear in dream reality that Rose has created. At the hospital, Matthew the Raven, a dream who was a man, goes to Jed's room and finds Gilbert, a man who was a dream. They talk for a moment, and Matthew tells him that Rose is a vortex. Gilbert is alarmed. In order to deal with the vortex, Gilbert explains, Morpheus must kill Rose. To be continued.
In Lost Hearts, we pick up with Rose, naked except for a strategically wrapped bedsheet, confronting Morpheus on a high, craggy peak in the dreaming. Morpheus tells Rose she's the vortex. This means that without intention, Rose breaks down the walls between dreamers' unconscious minds. Eventually, Rose will implode, causing irreparable damage to the dreaming. Morpheus reveals he once let a vortex destroy a world, which means that what threatens the dreaming also damages the waking world. As Rose grapples with the idea that the guy who saved her from Funland at the serial killer's convention is now going to kill her, Gilbert and Matthew arrive, and Gilbert offers his life in exchange for Rose's, an offer which Morpheus explains he cannot accept. Death isn't that bad, Matthew the Raven offers by way of consolation. He reveals, or affirms, that he was once human, but not perhaps a very good one. Gilbert does better. You are the best thing about being human, says Gilbert. After your death, if you do stay in the dreaming, then visit me. Walk in my meadows and my green glades. Rest beneath my trees. Then he returns to his dream state as Fiddler's Green, a sylvan oasis of green and growing things. Meanwhile, in England, Unity Kincaid lies in a liminal space between waking and sleep and death as her daughter watches over her. She recalls a tall, dark man whose eyes danced like twin stars in her head. And then she dreams and appears in the dreaming as her youthful self, the self she recalls before the sleeping sickness that stole her life. Just as Morpheus cups Rose's jaw, seemingly about to end her life with a kiss, Unity interrupts. She should have been the vortex had she not gone into a coma. She sasses Morpheus and then tells Rose that in exchange for the ring, which Unity once gave her, Rose needs to reach inside herself and give Unity whatever it is that makes Rose the vortex. It is the dreaming, she reminds her granddaughter, and anything is possible. Rose puts her hand inside her chest and removes a crystal heart. Unity takes the heart and places it in her chest, and now she is the vortex. In her room in the waking world, the old Unity dies and wakes inside the dreaming. Now Rose is free to go resume her life. Typing on an electric typewriter, Rose writes journal entries about Hal, the landlord, who has sold his house to the Spider Women, who are coming out of their shell, and Ken and Barbie, who have split up. Barbie has gone seriously weird, she adds, a note to file away for future reference. Rose, her mom, and younger brother Jed have all moved into a house outside of Seattle, but Rose is still processing her grief over the events of the series and over the death of her best friend Judy, whom we met in the diner in the 24 Hours storyline. Rose discovers that Gilbert, whom she hasn't seen again, looked like the writer G.K. Chesterton, but unlike that spiritual soul, she is wrestling with the idea that if her dream was true, then we humans are all just pawns, dolls in a dollhouse. In the end, we see Rose cut her hair and go back to her natural shade, a sign that, as she says, she is rejoining the human race. We end with a coda. Dream walks through a gallery and picks up a crystal heart, Desire's sigil, which we have seen before in the scene where Rose pulls it out of her chest. Morpheus walks into his sister brother's realm and confronts them. Desire impregnated Unity all those decades ago, which meant that this was a long con, and if Dream had been forced to kill Rose, he would have killed a family member, which is one of the constraints which binds the endless. Dressed as a cat, Desire tries to hide their fear. When Dream makes himself abundantly clear, he will not stand for this kind of thing again, and if Desire crosses him, they will face not just Dream, but also the elder sibling's death and destiny. Perhaps more frightening for Desire are Dream's other words. We of the endless are the servants of the living. We are not their masters. Desire, like Rose, tries to brush it off. They are nothing like a doll. Nothing like a doll at all.
All right, Alisa. So here we are with Into the Night and Lost Hearts. This is all kind of really interesting, and I cannot wait to get the discussion of Desire. But before we get through all of that, I want to know, what is your overall response to this set of issues?
Well, we have done a lot of world building here. It reminds me of how in classic TV serialized mystery, you get the monster of the week, but you also get the world building of the core cast of characters. And here we've resolved the monster of the week, the whole storyline of serial killers. But what we've done here is learn that there are implications and tensions that are going to reverberate through the rest of the series. We learn that Desire fears cracking like delirium, and that they also live in the shadow of the absent endless sibling who abandoned his realm. We also learn about the great taboo of shedding family blood, and get a bit more understanding of how the living can become dreams and how dreams can sometimes join the living. There's just overall this deeper sense of how the Endless are a family with alliances and rivalries and really presumably awful Thanksgiving dinners. But most of all, I think at the very end, we learn that Neil understands, just like Phoebe Waller-Bridge of Fleabag does, the great importance of changing your hair when you are ready to start a new chapter in your life.
That is hugely important and quite the insight. And I feel like really kind of seen in that moment, because I have had exactly that thing. My hair changes every time something significant in my life changes, my hair changes. So that was kind of a fun little note. I really actually enjoyed these two. And it's funny because it contains a lot of stuff that I typically, that are like writing devices that I don't particularly care for. One is the dream sequence and one is the cliffhanger. And for the reasons that I'll explain as we get into it, they both get a pass here. For various reasons. But aside from that, I love the artwork, the aesthetics that are built upon each of these characters that look so different. And then they come together in this eclectic crescendo of just imagery and meaning and everything. And it's so interesting for me coming in as somebody new to comics, how incredibly powerful the artwork is. Part of me, as we're doing these really long, extended, summaries of what goes on, I'm like, should we make these shorter? Are we giving everything away? But the fact of the matter is that nobody is gonna not buy the comic because we told them what happened. There's so much going on in here in the visuals that we're not going to be able to give away in a podcast. You got to go and buy these comics. They are absolutely amazing. But between these two stories, I think the visuals of it and the ways in which the visuals contributed to the storytelling is probably one of my favorite things about these two issues. And it was really, really fun to kind of dive into that. And as I'm slowly week to week gathering, something of an understanding of the language of comics and really appreciating the visuals, it's becoming just a lot of fun, an extra element to the appreciation of hardcore storytelling, which is usually what I go in for. But let's go ahead, and as long as we're going to talk about visuals, we have to start with the McKean cover art. We have Into the Night, with these purplish red hues. We have lace over a grungy wooden background, and the center has a woman's face under that lace with a spider crawling over it, and it is beautiful and horrifying at the same time, which is one of these lovely, kind of fusions of opposites that I really enjoy. And there's also what appears to be a dragonfly. I don't remember a reference to a dragonfly. But of course, that's one of those things where I'm like, what does that symbolize? What does that mean? Is that something to come? Are we looking at something in the future? Are dragonflies going to be significant to these stories eventually? Or what does it mean? And I always think that that's really cool.
I am not remembering a specific iconography to dragonflies. And I'm sure now that somebody's going to come in and say, "Oh, don't you know it's a symbol of literary impotence?" No, that will be a future
Right.
story. Literary impotence is a future. Um,
Yes. Hmm.
but maybe there seems to me something about dragonflies that are about impermanence. I don't know if that's
Hmm.
just an association to some long ago poem, but the idea that dragonflies are this brief, I think they have perhaps even a briefer moment of living and mating than butterflies.
Hmm.
They are the
Oh, interesting.
27-year-old rock stars of the insect world, I think. I'm not sure. I may be just making that up.
It's occurring to me now that what we really need to do is get a dream dictionary so that whenever we have an element on a Dave McKean cover that we're like, I don't know what that means, then we can go in and kind of see what the meaning might be. I mean, maybe Dave had a dream dictionary that he was pulling from.
I think we should get two different dream dictionaries, like one, more, English Celtic and the other more
Yes.
Russian whatever, and
Oh,
that way we
yes.
can compare and contrast.
Can pull some different ideas. I think that'd be a lot of fun. All right, so the Lost Hearts cover is orangey, fiery hues. We've got a person sitting on a leather chaise. The fire is bursting behind them. Their chest is exposed. Their eyes look like fiery slits. There's empty picture frames everywhere, and what looks like a painting without a frame on its side in front of what looks like a large doll's house. So it looks like to me like it's Desire sitting on the chaise. That person has like a non-binary feel to them, and then they're just sitting there where everything's on fire, which seems to me like something that Desire would do. And I think it's interesting that Desire, as one of the anthropomorphized concepts, is the one that everybody has the most problem with, that they're so bad. It's almost Buddhist in philosophy, except that Buddhism usually isn't this passionate. When it sees something as negative, it's just like, that's not good for you. Drop the hot thing. But it's interesting, especially because I personally don't see this volume as being particularly about Desire. It starts and it ends with Desire, so we've got those lovely bookends going on there, which I love when that happens. And I find it really interesting also, that Desire has been, running this long con on Dream, which is really interesting. But yeah, let's talk about the rest of the story. I'm going to see if I can make that connection, because it does kind of feel like we've got a few different stories. Like in this volume, we've got the Corinthian serial killers, serial convention kind of thing. We've got Jed and Rose looking for Jed and Unity and all of that. Then we've got Rose as a vortex, and then it's bookended with Desire on either end. And so to me, like, it feels like a lot of pieces that I'm not sure how they all exactly go together, kind of putting this volume into one piece. But we've got this lovely book ending, and I kind of want to like figure out what the thread is that pulls all of that together.
Well, it's interesting because I was reflecting that Desire's Web is definitely a trap. And
Yeah.
it's a different conception of desire from the one that you and I are familiar with in
Hmm.
romance as a genre. Desire is different from lust in
Yeah.
romance literature. So there's a way in which we think of lust as being just, the kind of undifferentiated horniness that my unneutered male dog feels for any large cushion. And desire in romance is this very specific longing for a very specific person.
Hmm.
And in this world, desire is something else. Desire is much more that sort of feline fixation with one particular bird, which it is going to torture systematically until it's finally completely dead. But that apart, I was also thinking about how, we're talking about universal dreams and symbolism and dream mythologies, but we also get glimpses of how all of our dream worlds are quite distinct and quite separate. And I think that those things are both true. I know that, for example, if you dream about losing your teeth, that is a mortality dream. And yet
Mm-hmm.
each of us have, I think, our own symbolic systems. For example, the basement of my mom's Upper West Side apartment building has always been a symbol of, hell to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think we do all have, as much as like the dream dictionary would give this idea that there's a universal symbolism to particular things. I think that we all have our own particular, like you have to write your own dream dictionary. You have to like write down your dreams and what the symbols are in them and then kind of puzzle that out in order to be able to like unlock the secrets to your own mind. And everyone is a very individual space. So I think it's so interesting how all of this comes together, how we have all these dream sequences with all of these different spaces that kind of blend into each other, and how dangerous a vortex is. We end up getting, Dream's story of what happened the last time he let a vortex run rampant and it just destroyed a whole universe. Like it took everybody out. And so now he knows that he has to kill the vortex. And that's, of course, part of all of this, is that bringing all of these different separate dream spaces into one space is incredibly dangerous.
Yes. So when we look at how the vortex operates in the dreaming, it's like a cancer of the imagination. And what it's doing is, by breaking down the separation between things that ought to be separate, it is working this massive destruction on the body of the dreaming. And we see that the body of the dreaming, like dreaming itself, serves some very vital purpose to our waking worlds.
Yeah, I mean, it's something it's really important, and we all need to have that space. The fact that we turn to stories, when we sleep, I think is kind of a fascinating element of human existence that is so normal because we're so used to it. But when you think about it, it's important, it's significant. And it's funny because in storytelling, ironically, I typically really hate dream sequences. And the reason why I usually don't like them is because they often come up at times when, and I will say, like in my first novel, I'm totally guilty of this. I didn't know what to write. I wrote a dream sequence to patch me from one place to the other and just kind of figure it out. And instead of taking it out after the drafting process, I just left it in there, without really knowing what it meant. It didn't mean anything, So I think that like sometimes dream sequences can be used for that. Sometimes they're used to add an air of mystery and symbolism and all of that to something that feels rather, I think in a lot of instances for me with dream sequences, feels unearned. Now, of course, in the dreaming, in Sandman, dream sequences are hugely narratively important and absolutely narratively relevant. And I love the fact that we don't, I think, in Sandman really go to them necessarily in the way that a lot of times you see them just kind of shoved into something where they don't really have a connection to the actual narrative. And here it's all about the dreaming. It's all about what we do in that space, in the dreaming, So I think it's interesting, and absolutely the dream sequences get a pass, especially because of the art opportunities that come up in really getting a sense of all these different dream spaces. I mean, you look at Barbie and Ken's dream spaces, you're like, these people do not belong together.
Well, I think that yes, no, they absolutely don't. And if you could see the dreams of the person sleeping next to you, it might be a great relationship test for whether or not, if your imaginary worlds do not align, perhaps this is not the right person for you. Which reminds me of this wonderful 80s film. I can't remember. I know that there was a man who was the main female character was schizophrenic. And at some point, she is asked if she is in a romantic relationship with this guy who's happens to be gay. But her response is, "Oh no, we sleep in different worlds."
Yeah, very, very true. And I think that, like, to a certain degree, we absolutely all do. I love Again, to go back like to the art and the way that the art is expressed in this house, and here we have this house. It's all about boundaries and what happens when those boundaries are broken down, and that boundaries in and of themselves are not always a bad thing. Sometimes you need limitations on things. Like for any, writer who's gone up against a blank page without any limitations, without anything like you have to do this, it can be the lack of boundaries can be overwhelming. Having a limitless space can be really overwhelming. And dreams by their nature are both limited and unlimited. Because I've been in planes that have crashed into the ocean and just become boats. Like I've had that experience in dreams before, so it is limited and it's ephemeral and it is like constant metamorphosis. It's so fascinating to see that represented here.
Yes, well, a couple of things occur to me as you're saying this. One is that in this universe, dreams don't operate the way dreams ordinarily do, because
Mm-hmm.
essentially they are dreams in the same way that Narnia is.
Yeah.
It is a separate realm. And so
Mm-hmm.
a dream sequence in the Sandman isn't really a dream sequence at all. What it is it's a trip, to the other side of the wardrobe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that was one thought that occurred to me. And the other is that, in these different art styles, one thing that we can see again and again is how much Dringenberg and Malcolm Jones III working together are really able to convey the relationships between people. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've spoken about it before. It's something called acting, when
Yeah.
the way an artist conveys the emotion and the back and forth of emotion between two or more people. So I know that for me, it is one of the most important, underrated aspects of the art in comics. And when I have looked for artists, I've talked to editors about I want someone who is really good at acting.
Oh, I love
So
that.
it's about pacing. It is about the nuance of how close two people are standing together and whether that closeness feels threatening or erotic or both.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And between Morpheus and Rose, we definitely get a hint of both of those things. I think if a different artistic team were on this book, you might get other wonderful aspects, but for this very sensual and somewhat malign storyline,
Mm-hmm.
this is really a perfect kind of art choice, I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And then when we get to that part, where we have Rose, I mean, Rose is pretty much naked. She's just sort of surrounded in this toga esque sheet that seems to cover up most of her, but not always all. We just get this sense of her having this, this kind of magical, sort of almost goddess type of presence in the dreaming while she's trying to figure out what's going on. And he's saying he's going to kill her, you know? Yeah.
But her nudity is, first of all, her body language is always very specific to who she is as a character. She
Hmm.
conveys a relaxation, a sort of a casualness with how she wears her body that
Hmm.
feels like the essence of youthfulness.
Yeah.
She is not posing or self-conscious or trying to seduce. And and so what is sensual about her is that sense of relaxation and confidence in her naked body. She is when I see her body, I don't feel like I am looking at her through this, male gaze kind of a lens.
Hmm.
It
Yeah.
struck me how in the first Wonder Woman movie, there's this moment where Gal Gadot is rising up out of a World War I trench to fight
Hmm.
the good fight. And what I noticed was what wasn't there. I
Yeah.
noticed that as we rise with the camera, we're rising with her. And at no point do we see the delectable undercurve of her ass. And I've
Yeah.
gotten so used to that. Like, of course, you're going
Hmm.
to follow, the camera will cup her ass. It didn't do that. And
Hmm.
even though I am a great admirer of Gal Gadot's ass and all her parts, I started to tear up at just
Hmm.
being able to experience her as heroic. So where that camera angle is in relationship
Yeah.
to um, Wonder Woman's nude, body and to
Hmm.
Rose's nudity, they both feel like we are with the character instead of lusting after her.
Yeah, which, by the way, in the 90s, hats off to that. That we can see a woman's body without it being this, like, objectifying male gaze kind of thing. It's okay to see a woman's body. It's the way in which that body is shown that makes all the difference. I had a similar experience watching Black Panther for the first time, that the women were treated like human people, which seems like not a lot to ask, but they were treated like people with their own thoughts and ideas and motivations and everything. They just happened to also be women, and they were dressed in a way that let them be beautiful while at the same time not being objectified. And it is a real, like, a breath of relief. It's almost like it's like you're so used to being slapped that when you're not slapped, it's this weird moment where you're like, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? And you have to actually, like, sit and think about it because we're so used to it. And to have that now has been shocking and wonderful to see that happen more and more, where we're getting away from that male gaze way of looking at women, to have that experience in the 90s, reading a comic book of all things, that's incredible. That's wonderful. One of the things I really love about Rose in this is one of the things that she said. She says that everyone's dreams are them searching for a place to belong. And I find that an interesting idea because so much of human existence is about the search for a community that fits. And the interesting thing about the dreaming as its own universe is that it is kind of a bubble universe, right? It's one bubble with lots of little bubbles in between, and they do remain distinct, except when the vortex comes in and starts mixing everything all up together. So I find it really interesting that we just kind of drop this one little note about what everyone is searching for, like what is their desire, for the community that fits, for the place that is right for them. And it's a tiny little moment. It's just a throwaway line, but it was really significant to me when I read it. I really like that.
Mm, yeah, it's making me think about a dinner party. I think it's going to come up in Season of Mists, where we get to
Mm-hmm.
see that we, the dreamers, are
Mm-hmm.
sometimes drafted into serving at the banquets in the dreaming. And so, yeah, so it's just a little note to myself. I'm suddenly remember this moment where there are two dreamers who are just regular living people who are dreaming, and they are having a moment of connection as they serve at this
Mhm.
banquet in the dreaming.
Oh,
But that
God,
is
what a
all
wonderful
to come.
idea. I can't wait to see that. Yeah, that it's just I really like a lot of these concepts that sort of come in and float in throughout this story. They're like little. It feels like a magpie just weaving in little pieces of glitter, throughout. It's kind of neat. And one of the things too, like I said, there are two writing devices that have been used in these issues that I don't typically like. Again, dream sequences, total pass. Absolutely, it's part of the universe. It's narratively significant. Totally works. Love every minute of it. The cliffhanger, I usually do not enjoy. I appreciate that there is a publishing need sometimes for that. You've got a story that just goes, it's too much for one issue and you've got to split it up between the months, and so you cut it in the middle, and I get that. I didn't appreciate it in television when they would give you a cliffhanger and then you'd have to wait the whole summer and then wait to find out what happened. Now that binging television is a thing and having the whole volume that I can read so I don't have to wait between Into the Night and Lost Hearts, it doesn't bother me quite as much. But yeah, like I like a complete complete narrative. If I get an issue of something, I want a complete narrative in there. And I get why it had to be. It's all right. It's fine. But one of the things, though, that I always talk about when I talk about cliffhangers is, game changers versus cliffhangers. And game changers are when at the end of a story, we know what's happened, but it's so monumentally changed everything that the idea of what is going to happen next is what draws you in, as opposed to we don't know what's happened and now we're going to be continued until next time. So I usually appreciate a game changer a little bit more, but here I was able to read both of them at once, so it didn't really bother me as much as it usually does.
Well, I think that we all tend to forget how much the format in which something was originally released shapes the storytelling.
Yeah.
And I, back when Sandman first came out, the mandate was keep somebody so hooked in that a month later they will go back and buy another issue. Yep. I mean, some of them are some of the readers would have been subscribers, but a lot of them would have been going to a comic book store and having to remember, oh, it's time for me to buy this next issue. So you can see that now still in the DNA of the story. I think binge watching has shaped how stories are crafted, because we expect that people will want to immediately satisfy that urge. But I see now that there is this movement into shorter serialized stories again. I'm seeing, especially in audiobooks, there are these little stories that are now being chunked into 15-minute bites. Sorry. So it'll be interesting to see how how that is going to affect the storytelling. And I'm sure I'm going to screw this up, but there's that old, what is it? The medium is the message.
Yeah.
Is that this? Yeah. This is that, right? Where it's the format influencing
the form,
the telling of the story itself.
It does. It has a huge influence on it. And, back in the day, and understanding that you guys were laying the track down as the train was coming, that this was a month to month kind of thing, that you had to stay on that, deadline in order to get to the next one. It's interesting how form does interact with the way that we tell stories and the methods that we use to tell stories. So it's always kind of interesting. And a cliffhanger, is like, cliffhangers always drive me crazy, but I get it. Like, I understand why people did it and why in here we've really got a double issue. We've got a story that needed more than just what one issue would give you.
And we're going to end up talking about what changes or doesn't change when this goes from being a story that was written to appear once a month to being a Netflix series that presumably people will be binging and arriving to work bleary-eyed and barely compass mentis.
I'm very, very much looking forward to that. I cannot wait to see this translated. And one of the things, of course, that I want to see translated, I'm very excited for this, is Gilbert. Gilbert, who is probably one of my favorite things about this volume. He's so fun. The fact that he's based on G.K. Chesterton and he's got that kind of avuncular sort of sense to him is really nice. But I love that he's really, tenderly devoted to Rose. He rushes to Rose's side and Matthew asks him why. You can't change anything. And Gilbert says, I don't think I can help, but I can hope and I can pray. And again, if we're talking back to how does all this work with desire, right? Hope is what we chase. Hope is what we go after. Just that sense that there is possibility that things could be better. It's why we don't give up. So hope is one of the things that we most desire, and that we go after. And that's what he's going after. And I love him, as Fiddler's Green, when he's talking to Matthew and he's trying to explain who he is. And he says, my dear bird, you seem to be laboring under a misapprehension. Fiddler's Green is not a who, it's a where. I was not a person, Matthew. I was a place. And the idea that a place can have consciousness and personality. And any of us who have had a love affair with a place, or in the circumstance of my house, a hate affair with a particular place, you do feel like there is personality there, like there is sentience and agency in some sense to particular places. And the jump from that to a place in the dreaming, a dream being able to live as a man, is such an interesting idea.
It is a fascinating idea. I love the world building that goes on here, where we see that a place can become a character in the dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
In Stardust, which was originally, before it was a movie, I think it became a comic too, but first it was sort of an
Mm-hmm.
illustrated story with glorious artwork by Charles Vess, who is just one of the great modern masters of fairy art. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but in Stardust, the heroine is a star, and when she
Mm-hmm.
comes into fairyland, she is translated into an anthropomorphization.
Mm-hmm.
Also, she becomes Claire Danes, but that is obviously in the movie. One of the
Mm-hmm.
things I'm spacing on who voices G.K. Chesterton's Gilbert in the Audible version, but
Mm-hmm.
there's this little Hoom that
Yes.
we see, and I I sort of heard it as this phlegmy but plummy phlegmy old man whom, but in the Audible it's done wonderfully.
Mm-hmm.
But I should have looked that up. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be really interesting to see that incarnated also in a character in the Netflix series. It makes me want to go back and reread G.K. Chesterton. I had not read him in the
Mm-hmm.
90s. And Bob Morales, who's a wonderful writer, no longer with us, said, "You haven't read The Man Who Was Thursday?" And he introduced me to G.K. Chesterton's writing.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, and I can absolutely recommend the Audible series. The second series just came out. So that's a little bit ahead of us where we are now. But I was both in the early parts of this, both reading and listening to the Audible book. And it does, because the people who created it, Neil was involved in it, are also doing the sound. It is another level on which you get nuance and information that you maybe didn't have from reading it and from looking at the visuals. There's another layer to that onion there. And I would absolutely heartily recommend it. It is so amazingly worth whatever the price is on it. It's not
But
it's not enough. It's so amazingly done.
it's so
Mm-hmm.
delicious to, you
Mm-hmm.
go from creating the audio soundtrack when you're reading the comic to
Yeah,
creating the visual. So
the
you're,
visuals.
with the Audible. So it's in
Mm-hmm.
both, you are really very much a participant in co-creating the
Yeah,
world.
because it's a performance, not a reading. That is a full performance, and it is just unbelievably done with really amazing actors, just killing it in that audio version, which makes me even look forward to the Netflix version even
Oh
more.
yeah.
It's yeah,
And you get to hear Neil narrating
hmm
the
yeah,
narrative bits. And Neil
hmm
just tells really good bedtime stories. One of the first times that I met him, I ended up going back to his house where he was living with his first wife, Mary, and their kids who were then little.
hmm
And he started to tell. I think it was Holly mainly that he was telling a bedtime story, and I ended up just sitting on the edge of the bed and listening to Neil read a
yeah.
bedtime story, which is very similar to the experience I think you get when you're listening to him narrate the Audible.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. And this is not, we're not getting paid for this. This is not a commercial. It just like literally is wonderful. And I have to say that I am very excited to be discovering Sandman now, when there are so many forms to enjoy, and looking forward to the Netflix series, because there's a lot of really amazing things that I think if I had discovered it back in the 90s when it was coming out in comic books, I would have been hungry for all of this stuff that we have now. So I'm very excited about that. Um, so here we get to Rose, right, who is a vortex. Once in every era, there is a vortex, one girl in all the world. Sorry, I'm going into my Buffy thing. Um, And the thing, I do not know why. She is special for no real reason. And it seems like a big thing not to know, especially because Dream has decided that the only solution for this problem is to like murder a girl. So that seems like a question you'd ask and try to find the answer to. Again, the universe is a mysterious place. Dream doesn't have access to all of the answers, but still, that seems like a really, really big deal. But the consequence, of course, of not killing the vortex means that everybody dies. So, and he knows, as he says, death is not always a bad thing, Rose, and he offers her to stay here in the dream world. And the unsaid portion of that is with me. There is kind of a sense, and I think it's more in the visual necessarily than in the text itself, but there is a sense of some sort of attraction and maybe a little bit of a seduction going on here between them.
And she is Desire's daughter, so or granddaughter, Desire's granddaughter.
Desire's granddaughter, as we will find out. Yeah.
So of course she's going to have, a lot of allure built into her DNA. I don't remember having seen the script, but I am confident that if that sense of attraction was being conveyed in the artwork, I'm sure it was in the script. I do think that in addition to the taboo against the spilling of blood, the taboo against perhaps getting to, flirty with your grandniece.
Great niece.
There is great niece. There's
great niece,
a little,
think, yeah.
I'm having a little bit of a
I think that would be a really interesting thing. Luckily, it does not come to that because once again, our damsel Rose is rescued, not by man this time, but by Unity, who is not fucking around. She comes in, she looks at Sandman. She's like, "You're obviously not very bright, but I shouldn't let it bother you." And she says, "Give me your heart." And this is so interesting. So then Rose pulls out from her chest a heart-shaped crystal piece of glass, which reminds me of Tales in the Sand, the blue heart-shaped crystals that they found, which of course, and then again, glass is made from sand, right? So here we have red and blue, like these two kind of like almost opposing colors, and then, but the crystal heart is also the symbol for desire. So I'm assuming that this is the moment when Dream sees the heart-shaped crystal, that's when he's on to exactly what has happened here and exactly who Rose is.
Yes, and it occurs to me, I did not know in the 90s what I now understand, which is that the way we inherit things can be very odd. So, let's say all the people who might say, I have my great grandmother was, half Sioux. And the truth is that the way inheritance goes, somebody could have then a lot of DNA from that great grandparent or none at all. And there's something about the symbolism of that crystal heart that says to me that whoever has that aspect of desire, it's like they've inherited not just an incredible allure and attractiveness, but in some way, what does desire do? Desire makes us break down the boundaries between us. And so there is some way that there might be a connection between being Desire's granddaughter and between being someone who breaks down the boundaries between dreamers.
Well, and dream and desire as words have a very similar meaning. I mean, in some circumstances, they are synonyms, right? What is your dream job, right? What is the job that you desire? It's the same thing, So it's really interesting how there's so much about the two of them that reflects on each other. And sometimes I wonder if that isn't the reason why it's so difficult for them to get along, So I think it's really interesting. And I feel like there's got to be something to the fact that this heart, although a different color, looks almost exactly like the heart that was found in the desert. The pieces of, fused sand that became heart-shaped that were found in the desert that have gone cold because they're blue. This one is hot and warm and red. It's just
But
interesting. I
that
feel like
was
there's got to be a
well,
line
well,
there.
I
Hmm.
think that part of that connection is just that. So the desert was the desert of the tribe of whom Nada was queen. And so we
Hmm.
see with both times that Dream has gotten involved, his most difficult sibling has
Yeah.
left little breadcrumbs behind. It's
Yeah.
a very it's a it's like that Brady Bunch special where the family all went to Hawaii and got the cursed whatever that was.
Right. Yeah. Oh
Um,
my God. I'd long forgotten about that. But yeah.
it's taken me a long time, but I think there is a Brady Bunch element to the endless.
Yeah. Oh God. Yes,
Except I
definitely.
think
There's,
I think
yeah.
Marcia would be Desire.
Uh-huh.
Um,
So which one is Jan? Is Jan despair?
I think Jan is
Marsha, Marsha,
Despair. Yeah,
Marsha.
Jan is
Yeah.
definitely Despair. Who is
Cindy's delirium.
Cindy is Delirium? Oh my God.
All right, all right, all right. Let's not spoil too much. We will definitely come back to this discussion later, though, when we map everybody to who they are in the Brady Bunch. But so another thing I wanted to talk about is once again here we are with Dream with empathy as a power play. Once again someone is saved. And Dream closes out that rescue by extending empathy. In the morning, Jed will wake up. He gives Jed back to this family. And it's an interesting thing that we return to once again after a tragedy. One Dream, in this case, was about to be party to. He tries to do some good, and I have some thoughts on that pattern, which I'm gonna, I think, close up when we get to Calliope because there's a bigger discussion to be had there. But I find it really just every time he does this, it opens up another kind of question space for me on like what is that actually about. I find that really interesting.
I love how you find the emotional motifs and through lines,
Hmm.
which I think are very much present. But yes, I think that every storyline that we encounter shows some kind of pressure and some kind of growth for Dream.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really I kind of love that because this story has so many other elements in which you could get away with not having that. But that emotional anchor, that growth, that kind of like pushing himself. It's such an interesting thing to watch, and the way that his empathy has evolved since having a tragedy fall upon him, and we're in something of a trauma narrative. I find it really interesting, and I love those moments. Those are kind of my favorite moments as we revisit them. Every time I see one, I'm like, oh, there we go. That's his thing. So in the first epilogue, right? I guess we have an epilogue and we have a coda, right? So the epilogue, we've got Rose. She cuts and dyes her hair, right? So we see the hair is everything.
Hair
It
is
is
everything.
hugely symbolic. She's done this thing. But also one of the interesting things is that she talks about her friend Judy. And we actually see Judy call Rose and asking if she's seen Donna in the harrowing 24 hours from the first volume. So we see Rose, kind of bringing that. And then once again, let me just say it again, every part of the pig, like we're pulling everything in. Nothing goes wasted at a Neil Gaiman story table. And Rose is also at this point questioning if her dream was true. And we're getting her in this deeply philosophical moment where she's like, if my dream was true, then everything we know, everything we think we know is a lie. We're all just dolls. And then at the end she decides to just let it go, and then she woke up. I suppose there are worse endings. It's really kind of neat the way that we sort of walk Rose through this whole philosophical gambit of what am I going to decide I believe happened here. That she gets to make a choice that will define her reality that she lives in, and she's not making that choice based on what she thinks actual reality is. She's making that choice based on what is the reality that best suits her, you know?
And that's very existentialist, the idea
Yeah,
that there may not be an inherent meaning, but it's incumbent upon us to create
right.
that meaning. I remember reading somewhere my favorite definitions of nihilism, existentialism, and absurdism. Nihilism being there's no meaning inherent in anything. Existentialism, well, yeah, there's no meaning in anything, but you have to create it. And
Mhm.
absurdism, well, you have to create it. It's all going to go to shit anyway, but you gotta laugh.
That is wonderful. I love that. Yeah, and it's funny because I've read a little bit of Camus, just enough to be like, wow, that's a lot. But yeah, absurdism, as a philosophical treatise is one of these things where it's just, to me, it just seems like, fuck it. Might as well, you might as well play, right? If you're going to be here. So the second epilogue, or actually more of a coda, right? We've got this final bookend after the beginning where we met with Desire. And Dream uses Desire's sigil to call them. He accuses them of meddling with Rose and Unity, and he wants to know who Rose's grandfather was. And they go through this whole, kind of back and forth. And what I love, too, is we of the Endless are servants of the living. We are not their masters. And Desire sees people as dolls. Right. And this whole thing, like when you come back to it, the doll's house, the house as a symbol that has all these different rooms where there are boundaries between people. But then when they open up, it kind of breaks everything down. And who are the dolls? Who are the ones? We exist because they know deep in their hearts that we exist. We do not manipulate them. If anything, they manipulate us. We are their toys, their dolls. And it's so interesting. Again, here we are at the end of this whole story, which has had all of this stuff going on. We've had serial killers. We've had dreams who were men and men who were dreams. All of this stuff going on, a vortex about to threaten humanity. But we are ending on two notes of philosophy. Who are we to them? Who are they to us? And what do you do with that? It's really interesting to see that discussion.
And I do think that in this universe, both things are true. There are some
Mm-hmm.
ways in which mortals are the playthings of the endless. We can see at moments and subject to
Mm-hmm.
their machinations. And yet ultimately the endless are there in service of the mortals. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's an odd and reciprocal relationship. I was also thinking about how I started out by talking about how the desire as an anthropomorphized
Mm-hmm.
emotion is different in this universe than it is um, in the universe of Romance Landia.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, okay, I'm just going to take a step back and say that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I felt pretty confident saying, well, this is what it's like in, male-centric fiction versus this is more what it's like in women-centric fiction. These days, I feel less secure in talking about anyone who is not me because, I
Yeah,
think we're
right.
aware that there is so much more than, you know, men and women, and
Just
also
the
that,
binary. Mm-hmm.
one, do I really have access even to another woman's reality? No, any more than I have
Mm-hmm.
access to men's realities. But saying that, I think that as a woman, when I think about desire and wanting to be desired, there is something reciprocal. Like I can't
Mm-hmm.
separate out my desire to be desired in return. And there's
Yeah.
something about the way desire feels much more one directional in terms
Mm-hmm.
of, for all that desire is non-binary, there's something about the way they operate that
Mm-hmm.
feels a little more masculine to me, in
Mm-hmm.
that I think about how, and again, I don't know if this may be me thinking too much on the fly, and afterwards I'm like, why did I start to talk about this in the podcast when I hadn't thought it through properly?
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
I think about, as I so often do, 70s pornos and how and how in a 70s porno, the men don't seem to worry like, why would this beautiful young blonde woman desire me, a strangely schlubby middle-aged man? There's none of that self-doubt. It's just like, yes, she wants me.
Right.
And so, and again, I don't mean to be casting aspersions on the schlubby or the middle-aged, both groups which I partake in. But I'm wondering if there might be another incarnation of desire that reflects more this concern with being desired as well as with desiring, which is more reflective, self-reflective, and not just pushing itself out to affect others and move dolls around in the dollhouse.
I kind of love that. I hadn't really thought about a kind of masculine versus a feminine approach to desire, but I definitely do see this as more of like a masculine perception of desire going one way and not thinking about how it comes back. And what it is to be desired, and desire as a bad thing is always something that I was surprised when we first saw Death and Dream kind of bitch slapping desire in absentia, in the Sound of Her Wings at the end of the first volume. But yeah, it's kind of interesting how it does feel to me to be a somewhat male perspective of a conquest of desire, that you desire something, you go after it, and in wanting something that ends up causing problems, just the wanting of something. But the idea that someone may want you back, that it can go both ways, which I think is that feminine approach to desire, which is what we do see in romance novels.
Absolutely. And now that I've had a chance to also just think for 2 seconds about what I said, unscripted and without planning, I think that both human sexuality and male and female sexuality changes over time. And my personal theory is that a lot of what used to be generalized about male sexuality was cisgender, heterosexual male sexuality.
Yes.
Was speaking about male sexuality, say before the age of 40, before the age in which you're supposed to start studying Kabbalah. And I think that in some ways, for all that the endless are ancient beings, I think developmentally they are in their late teens to early 20s, roughly. And I think, give them a few more millennia and who knows what they might become.
How they might, I mean, clearly, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but yeah, like it's as we get into Delirium, we see that Delirium has in fact gone through a transition, and the cracking like Delirium is what Desire is afraid of.
Ooh, and we've just discovered that there was another sibling who, like the Duke of which the English Wallace Simpson and
Edward the
Eighth? Edward, the one who abdicated.
Edward the Eighth, right? I think, yes.
Anyway, yes, him. So, so we've got just as the monarchy in England seems to be, very worried about members abdicating and walking away. We've got with the endless also the one who got away, and that is another big taboo that has been crossed, and we're gonna. I mean, certainly that is the beginning of cognizance that there is a mystery about this missing endless. So, Lani, we've gotten to the section where we each call out our favorite page. What is yours?
Oh God, it's this panel. I love typographical art. And in this panel, we have one half of the panel as Chantal holding a book, peering out from behind a white wall. And on the wall is the text that says Chantal is having a relationship with a sentence. Just one of those things, a chance meeting that grew into something important for both of them. And the thing is that the text itself is not written the way that the dialogue is written. It's hugely stylized. It's incredibly beautiful. And the thing is, I've always wanted a tattoo, and I've never been able to choose one, because I'm always like, well, then you got to have it on forever. And I am a being of the ephemeral. I am of the moment. I change my mind about what I love, from week to week, or what I want. But looking at that panel, I was like, oh my God, I would totally get that tattoo. It is so awesome. You just got that half of her face. You see the book, you see the text. It's just so beautiful. I love that page. How about you? What's your favorite page?
Well, I love the moment where Rose rests her head on Fiddler's Green and asks if there's anything they can do to stop Dream from killing her. And her despair and his very parental grief just comes across so well in the artwork. And I think that at a stage in my life where I've been hit with some losses and thinking about mortality, I think there's this sense that we all can want to escape that moment, and having the solace of this man who is a place, and a place where you can go to. It's what better place for a grave really than Fiddler's Green.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's really beautiful. Okay. So what's your favorite part?
What is my favorite part? I think it's gotta be Unity kind of sassy. I'm imagining her with a little snappy finger saying, you're obviously not very bright, but I shouldn't let it bother you. And I think there may also be a tie. I remember in the 90s just adoring where Rose is flying with Morpheus. And, the Dringenberg Morpheus is, I think, arguably the hottest Morpheus. If he's the young Johnny Depp Morpheus.
Yeah.
And I love that. Do you know what Freud said about dreams of flying? It means that you're really dreaming about having sex. And Morpheus's response, tell me then, what does it mean when you dream about having sex? I think on reflection, it probably depends on what kind of sex you're dreaming about having. If it's like 1970s porno sex, God only knows.
It comes with a pizza. My favorite... My favorite part. I love the meeting of Gilbert and Matthew. There's something so nice about that reflective symmetry of a man who used to be a dream and a dream who used to be a man meeting in this kind of liminal space and understanding each other and kind of buddy copping a little bit, which I really loved. I thought that was kind of fun.
If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, connect with the show on Twitter. Follow @Chipperish and use the hashtag #EndlessPodcast, or send your comments or questions to endless@chipperish.com.
This episode of Endless was brought to you by the Chipperish Media producers who support us on Patreon at the power producer level. These people are the reason why Endless is coming to you free and ad-free right now. So thank you to Abby, Alice, Christina, Erica, Jane, Kevin, Kristen, Michael, Rose, Sarah, Shelley, and Stephania. And this week's special message for our power producers: if the Cuckoo's forces mean to attack us directly, they must do it before we reach the brightly shining sea.
To find out how you too can support Chipperish Media, visit patreon.com/Chipperish. Other ways to show your support: write a great review on Apple Podcasts, tell your friends about the show, or reach inside yourself and give me whatever it is that makes you the vortex.
This episode of Endless was edited by Chipperish content editor Jack Cram. Jack, farewell, my dear. You were the best thing about being human. We'll be back next time with Calliope, issue 17 of the Sandman series and the first of Dream Country. Until then, if my dream is true, then everything we know, everything we think we know, is a lie.